picture this, okay? It's 1990,
Right.
and we really need to set the scene here because the historical context is just, well, it's absolutely vital to understanding the sheer madness of what we're about to talk about today.
Yeah, you really can't understate how wild that era was.
Exactly. So in the late 1980s, the Japanese economic bubble was, it was arguably one of the most spectacular financial anomalies of the entire 20th century.
Oh, without a doubt.
We're talking about an era where the theoretical value of the dirt beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was said to be worth more than all the real estate in the entire state of California.
Which is just, a mind-boggling statistic to even say out loud.
Right. It's insane. And Japanese corporations were just buying up American icons left and right. Rockefeller Center, Columbia Pictures, Pebble Beach. Cash was essentially infinite.
It felt infinite, yeah.
But then as the calendar turned to 1990, the bubble didn't just pop. It spectacularly detonated.
Detonated is the right word.
The stock market went into an absolute free fall. Real estate values just evaporated overnight. The banking sector essentially froze, totally saddled with trillions of yen in bad loans. You have total domestic economic devastation.
Yeah, it was a systemic shock. It permanently altered the trajectory of the whole nation. It ushered in what economists now famously call the lost decades.
Right, exactly.
A period of just profound grinding stagnation that Japan wrestled with for a whole generation.
So put yourself in the shoes of a corporate board in Tokyo in 1990. If you look at literally any traditional business textbook, the logical, rational response for a corporation facing this kind of absolute apocalypse at home is very simple.
You retreat.
Yes, you retreat. You board up the windows, you fire non-essential staff, you hoard whatever cash you have left, and you hide until the storm passes.
Yeah.
That is the fundamental corporate survival reflex.
Yeah, the standard economic literature, especially from the West, would absolutely dictate consolidation. You protect the core business. You do not embark on wild, risky ventures when your home base is literally crumbling beneath your feet.
And here's the ultimate counterintuitive slap in the face. And this is really the hook for everything we are going to talk about today in this deep dive.
Okay, lay it on me.
Japanese companies did not do that.
Right.
Instead of retreating, they did the exact opposite. Amidst the rubble of their domestic economy, these corporations triggered one of the most massive, frantic global capital migrations in human history.
Really is a stunning historical paradox, especially when you look at the raw numbers.
Seriously, it makes no sense on the surface.
Exactly. While the domestic economy was suffocating, Japanese multinational corporations were aggressively planting flags all over the globe. They were accelerating their overseas factory building at an astonishing, almost feverish rate.
Like panic building almost.
Yeah, we are talking about billions and billions of dollars suddenly flooding out of a dying domestic market and just pouring into completely foreign territories.
Which brings us to the core mission of our deep dive today. We're looking at this exact phenomenon and asking a fundamental question.
Right.
Were these corporations just fleeing a disaster in a blind, irrational panic? Or were they actually operating on a hidden, almost entirely unwritten set of rules about how the world actually works?
And that's the multi-billion-dollar question.
It really is. Because today we are unpacking a monumental study that completely blew my mind.
Yeah, it's a heavy hitter.
It's this incredible paper by Witold J from the University of Pennsylvania and Andrew Delios from the National University of Singapore. And what makes this so wild is that they didn't just sit in an ivory tower and theorize about corporate psychology.
No, not at all.
They tracked 165 Japanese publicly listed manufacturing firms. They literally watched them execute 2,705 overseas factory investments across 52 different countries right in the thick of this crisis, from 1990 to 1996.
We really need to pause and emphasize the sheer scale of the source material here.
Yeah, please do.
Because the methodology of this study is what makes its conclusions so bulletproof. This is not some collection of neat corporate anecdotes or a survey where CEOs just tell you what makes them look good.
Right, it's not a PR piece.
Exactly. This is an empirical masterpiece. The researchers constructed what you might call a God's Eye database.
God's Eye database, I love that.
Yeah. They took 1,658 Japanese publicly listed manufacturing firms. They crossed every single one of them with 155 potential host countries around the entire world.
Oh, wow.
And then they tracked every possible move they could have made over a 7-year period. When you strip out the statistical noise and the impossibilities, you were left with over 2 million, well, 2,010,096 to be exact unique combinations of firms, countries, and years.
Wait, okay, let's unpack this for a second. 2 million individual decision points. That is staggering.
It's massive. They essentially built a digital mathematical sieve to catch the true mechanics of global capital. They looked at every single time a company could have built a factory in a country and compared the times they actually did with the times they didn't.
Wow.
And they used that massive data set to isolate the exact variables that trigger human beings to risk billions of dollars.
And the thesis they pull from this mountain of data is absolutely mind-bending, because it turns out the ultimate fear of these multinational giants, these boardrooms full of supposed financial chess masters, isn't actually losing money.
No, it's not.
The data proves their ultimate terror is the uncalculable unknown.
Which systematically dismantles the illusion of the perfectly rational, hyper-calculating corporation.
Right, because we all want to believe they know exactly what they're doing.
Exactly. We have this deep-seated, comforting assumption in Western capitalism that billions of dollars only move after a spreadsheet mathematically proves it is the optimal, cost-efficient choice. We want to believe that the system is logical.
Yeah, that the math always wins.
But Henisz and Delios show that when you are dealing with genuine, profound uncertainty, that purely rational calculus just breaks down entirely.
So I want to challenge that slightly, or at least clarify it, because we really need to define uncertainty here for you listening. Are we just talking about business risk?
Whoa.
Like, oh, maybe the new Sony Walkman won't sell as well in Brazil as it did in France. Because companies model that kind of risk every single day. They have whole departments dedicated to it.
Yeah, that is a crucial distinction. There is a massive difference between risk and uncertainty. And it goes back to this economist, Frank Knight, in the 1920s.
Okay.
Risk is when you don't know the outcome, but you do know the odds. Think of a roulette wheel.
Right, red or black.
Exactly. You don't know if it'll land on red or black, but you know there are 18 red slots, 18 black slots, and maybe 2 green ones.
Yeah.
You can do the math. You can buy insurance. Uncertainty, true nation uncertainty, is when you don't even know what the game is. You don't know how many slots are on the wheel. You don't know who owns the casino. And you don't know if the casino will even be legal tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
The Japanese firms in 1990 were facing true uncertainty. The probabilities themselves were completely unknown.
And that completely shatters the first major illusion we are going to tackle today. The idea that costs and taxes dictate everything.
Right.
If you asked anyone on the street, or, if you opened up a freshman economics textbook and asked why a business moves a factory overseas, the answer is incredibly simple.
Very simple.
It's to find low taxes and cheap labor, period. It's the whole race to the bottom narrative. Capital supposedly hunts for the absolute cheapest possible environment to maximize shareholder return.
Yeah, that has been the dominant narrative of globalization for decades. And, I mean, to be fair to the traditional economists, the researchers did find that import and export tax rates mattered to some degree.
Sure, obviously a business doesn't want to pay high taxes if it can avoid it.
Exactly. But then the data reveals a massive, glaring paradox that standard economic theory simply cannot explain.
The data gives traditional economics a massive black eye here. Because when the researchers looked at where the money was actually flowing, these Japanese firms were aggressively piling billions of dollars into countries that had incredibly high tax rates and steep trade barriers.
Yes, wild.
They were choosing, repeatedly and deliberately, to go to places that their own financial spreadsheets said were objectively terrible ideas.
So to understand why a board of directors would seemingly self-sabotage like that, the paper outlines 2 completely different types of unknowns that a company faces when expanding overseas.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, there is firm-specific uncertainty. That just means you don't know the local market yet. You don't know the local culture. You don't know what consumers want to buy. You don't know how to negotiate with the local labor unions.
Right, that makes sense. That's just a learning curve.
But then there's a much darker beast, policy uncertainty.
Ooh, policy uncertainty.
Yet this is the fog of war. This is the fear that the fundamental rules of the game in that country could change overnight.
Okay.
And what the data shows is that when policy uncertainty is high, pure cost calculation takes a back seat to sheer survival.
Yeah.
In the eyes of a multinational board, a high-tax environment that is highly predictable is vastly superior to a low-tax environment that is completely unpredictable.
Wait, let me stop you there, because that assumes these brilliant CEOs are just throwing out their calculators. Are you telling me a billionaire CEO intentionally ignores a spreadsheet showing lower operating costs?
Essentially.
I mean, that is like choosing to buy an overpriced house in a boring, highly taxed neighborhood just because you know the property taxes will never ever change, rather than buying a cheap, beautiful mansion that happens to be sitting directly on a major fault line.
That is actually the perfect analogy. Let's run with that. If you buy the expensive house with high taxes, you can budget for it. You know exactly how much you will bleed every month. A multinational corporation can build a 10-year financial model around a high tariff or a high corporate tax rate.
Right, it just becomes a known business expense. You price it into your product and you move on.
Exactly. But you cannot build a financial model around an earthquake.
No.
You cannot model a sudden regime change or a midnight nationalization of your assets or a dictator waking up in a bad mood and deciding foreign companies can no longer repatriate their profits.
So the fault line is the uncalculable variable.
Precisely. The financial hit of a known high tax is a margin problem. The financial hit of a sudden, unpredictable policy shift is an existential threat. It's the total loss of the investment.
Wow.
So when spreadsheets can't protect you from the existential unknown, these mega corporations revert to a much older, much more primal instinct to make their decisions.
Which naturally begs the question, if the spreadsheets aren't dictating where these billions go, what does? If you are a Japanese executive in 1992, your domestic market is burning down, you have to go overseas to survive, but you are terrified of this policy uncertainty fault line, how do you pick a country?
It's a tough spot.
And the answer the data reveals is essentially a corporate security blanket. It is the blind following of the herd.
The academic term the paper uses is frequency-based imitation. But stripped of the jargon, it is a profoundly human phenomenon.
Yeah.
When you are standing at the edge of the dark, looking out at 155 potential countries around the globe, and you have to risk your company's entire future on one of them, the most compelling piece of market research isn't a 100-page McKinsey report on local demographics.
It's literally just looking out the boardroom window to see where the guys across the street are walking.
Exactly. The researchers prove mathematically that if other Japanese firms have already entered a specific country, a new firm's probability of building a plant there spikes dramatically.
That's crazy.
And remember, the model controls for other factors. So it's not just that they are all independently realizing a country is good. The statistical spike proves they are reacting to the presence of the others.
So they're just copying each other.
Yes. It's a social cue, completely overriding a technical financial calculation. To a board of directors facing the terrifying prospect of a foreign market they do not understand, the mere fact that others are doing it provides instant legitimization.
It's the empty restaurant syndrome.
Oh, yes.
I think everyone has experienced this.
Yeah.
You are traveling in a strange city, you are completely starving, and you walk down a street and see two restaurants side by side.
Classic scenario.
One is totally empty, but maybe it has a sign in the window saying it won an award, or it has great reviews on your phone. The other restaurant has a line of 50 people out the door and around the block.
You're joining the line.
Human nature dictates you are almost certainly going to join the line. Not because you have any empirical proof the food is better, but because 50 other human beings standing there makes you feel safe. It lowers the cognitive load of making a risky choice. What you were saying is that these mega corporations managing billions of dollars are essentially just joining the line to avoid getting fired if the food turns out to be bad.
I'd actually argue it goes even deeper than avoiding getting fired, though that's certainly part of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the paper draws heavily on neo-institutional theory to explain this.
Okay, neo-institutional theory. You need to translate that for me. That sounds incredibly dry.
Fair enough, fair enough. In plain English, neo-institutional theory argues that organizations don't just want to be efficient. They desperately want to appear legitimate.
Okay.
They want to conform to the accepted norms of their environment. When the uncertainty is incredibly high, when you simply cannot calculate the odds of success, doing what everyone else is doing suddenly transforms from a lazy shortcut into a highly defensible corporate strategy.
Covering their behinds, basically.
Exactly. If a Japanese company goes to Indonesia alone and fails, the CEO is an idiot who made a reckless gamble. But if 50 Japanese companies go to Indonesia and all fail together due to a sudden political crisis, the CEO isn't an idiot. It was an unforeseeable macroeconomic tragedy. The blame is socialized.
Wow.
By imitating the frequency of others, you are buying psychological and professional safety just as much as you are buying real estate for a factory.
Okay, so they follow the herd to feel safe. I get that. But here is where the plot of this study thickens dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
Because they aren't just following anyone. They aren't just looking for a random crowd to blend into. The data shows they are specifically, obsessively tracking their deadliest enemies.
This is a fascinating pivot in the data. We move from general frequency-based imitation, which is just following the sheer total numbers of Japanese firms, to what the researchers call trait-based imitation.
Trait-based imitation.
Okay. And mathematically, trait-based imitation is a significantly stronger gravitational pull. Firms intensely copy peers that share their exact specific traits, namely firms in their exact same industry.
Which is so completely backwards from how we are taught business strategy works. Right.
If you read Sun Tzu or modern business strategy books, you'd think a smart company would seek out a blue ocean. You want a completely open market with zero competitors where you can dictate the prices.
That's the dream.
You want to be the only game in town. But no. The data shows that where your biggest rival goes, you must go, even if the waters in that country are already blood red with competition. Why on earth would you intentionally walk into a fistfight?
Because your rival's presence in that market sends a highly specific, highly calibrated signal that a random company's presence simply cannot provide.
Okay, how so?
Think about the margins of error we discussed earlier. If you are a Japanese electronics manufacturer and you see a Japanese textile company successfully operating in Brazil, that tells you something.
Sure.
It tells you Brazil is broadly okay, maybe the banks function, maybe the ports work, but it doesn't tell you anything about the supply chains for microchips or the availability of electrical engineers.
Right, because making shirts isn't making TVs. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
However, if your direct competitor, who uses the exact same technology, targets the exact same consumer demographics, and operates on the exact same razor-thin profit margins, goes to Brazil and survives, that provides the absolute most precise, narrow margin of error for your own survival.
I see. So the textile company surviving doesn't mean I can survive. But if Sony survives, Panasonic knows they can survive.
Precisely. In the brutal calculus of global expansion, copying the enemy's homework is the most rational way to solve for unknown variables in your own equation.
Oh man, here's where it gets really interesting, because this brings us to what I consider the ultimate myth-busting, face-slapping moment of the entire deep dive.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
It has to do with the legendary Japanese keiretsu. Now, for anyone listening who hasn't spent time studying Japanese corporate history or business history from the 80s and 90s, we really need to explain what the keiretsu were, because they were mythological.
They really were the boogeymen of global business back then.
Exactly. Think of massive, interconnected business groups, giants like Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo. They weren't just single companies, they were massive webs of power.
Sprawling empires, basically.
Right. They were tied together by extensive cross-ownership of shares, they swapped executives, they had regular president's councils where the heads of all the different divisions would meet in secret. And crucially, they usually shared a massive central bank that funded them all.
Yeah, the main bank system was key.
To Western eyes in the 1980s, the keiretsu were viewed as these invincible, impenetrable phalanxes of global capitalism.
The Western fear of the keiretsu cannot be overstated. For decades, American and European business schools studied the keiretsu as the ultimate unfair competitive advantage.
They were obsessed with them.
The assumption, the absolute unquestioned dogma, was that the internal knowledge sharing, the deeply trusted back channels within the keiretsu family would be the primary engine of their global expansion strategy.
It makes sense on paper.
The logic was airtight. If your keiretsu brother in the shipping division went to Thailand and figured out how to bribe the right officials and navigate the ports, you, in the manufacturing division, would absolutely follow them to Thailand.
Obviously.
Because you could trust their inside information perfectly. They were family.
Right. The logic seems so totally airtight. But then, Henisz and Delios run the numbers. They feed the 2 million data points into their mathematical sieve.
And guess what happens?
The statistical influence of the mighty keiretsu on where these factories were actually built was zero.
It was completely statistically insignificant. The coefficient in their models for the keiretsu variable was essentially flat.
Flat. Unbelievable.
When the researchers isolated the horizontal keiretsu networks, they found absolutely no evidence that firms were following their alliance members into new markets. None.
I am still trying to wrap my head around that. The mythological superpower of the Japanese economy, the keiretsu, is basically a mirage when it comes to the terrifying reality of global expansion.
Pretty much.
It's unbelievable. It's like having a highly paid, trusted family financial advisor who has all your best interests at heart, and you completely ignore everything they say just so you can blindly copy the stock trades of the guy who sits across from you at work and is actively trying to steal your promotion.
It's ruthless.
It is incredibly cutthroat.
But when you reframe it around the specific goal of cognitive survival, it is incredibly rational.
Really? Explain that.
It is the ultimate testament to the power of pure market signals over institutional comfort.
Oh.
When a board of directors is sitting around a table in Tokyo, making a life-or-death, multi-hundred-million-dollar decision about where to pour concrete for a factory, they suddenly realize something profound.
What's that?
They realize that their cousin in the keiretsu, who maybe makes heavy chemicals or manages shipping logistics, doesn't actually know anything about the specific operational risks of building consumer electronics.
Oh.
The trusted cousin is safe, but ignorant. The hated enemy, however, knows exactly what the risks are. So you ignore the family and you stalk the enemy.
That is just a complete rewriting of business history. Okay, so we've established that following the herd, specifically the hostile herd of your direct competitors, solves the fear of the market.
Right.
It gives you a roadmap for the firm-specific uncertainty, but it doesn't solve the other terror we talked about earlier.
The policy uncertainty.
The fault line, the fear of the government and policy uncertainty. And this is where the paper introduces a concept that completely, fundamentally changed how I look at global news and international relations.
This is, without a doubt, the most profound contribution of Henisz's work to the broader field of political economy. It's the question of how we actually define and measure political risk.
Right. If you walk down the street and ask anyone, even a savvy investor, what political risk in a foreign country looks like, they will give you a very standard list.
Riots, wars.
Exactly. They will say it's the threat of civil war or riots in the streets or violent military coups or a socialist government suddenly seizing your assets and nationalizing your factory. But according to the massive data set in this study, that common sense view is completely wrong. Or, at the very least, it's looking at the bloody symptoms rather than the underlying disease.
The problem with the traditional way of looking at political risk is that it's highly subjective and retrospective. You only know a country is risky after the riot happens.
Right, which is too late for your factory.
Exactly. Henisz and Delios introduce a radical, predictive new metric. It's called the Political Hazards Index.
The Political Hazards Index.
And the beauty of this index is that it completely strips away all the qualitative, subjective, media-driven judgments about a country's politics. It does not care if the Western media deems a foreign leader good or bad.
Doesn't care about the PR?
Nope. It doesn't care if the regime claims to be pro-business or anti-business. The index depends entirely on one cold, structural, mathematical metric.
And what's that?
The number of independent veto points within that government structure.
Veto points. Okay, let's unpack this because the implications of this are staggering to me. What exactly is a veto point in this context?
The entire index is built on a spatial model of politics. Let's simplify it.
Okay, country A.
Country A has an executive, let's call him a president or a prime minister or a supreme leader. The title doesn't really matter. What matters is that this executive has the unilateral power to change the laws.
Okay.
They can change the corporate tax rate by decree. They can rewrite property rights on a whim. In Country A, there is no independent legislature to stop them. There are no independent courts that can strike down their decrees. There are no powerful regional governors who can refuse to enforce the new rules.
So they have absolute power.
Exactly. In that specific scenario, the political hazard score of Country A mathematically approaches 1. That is maximum red alert danger for capital.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. What if the autocrat in Country A is a massive fan of free markets?
Yep.
What if he went to Harvard Business School, he loves foreign investment, and he promises zero taxes forever? Wouldn't a corporation love that? Why is that maximum danger?
Because of the time horizon. A factory is a 30-year investment. You might love the autocrat today, but what happens in year 5?
Right.
What if he wakes up in a bad mood? What if the country hits a severe economic recession, the populace gets angry, and he desperately needs a scapegoat or a quick source of cash?
The corporation becomes the piggy bank?
Yes. Because there are no independent institutions to stop him, no veto points. He can instantly flip the script. He can seize your factory on a Tuesday afternoon,
Right.
and there is no legal recourse. There is no friction to stop his change of heart.
That is terrifying.
That absolute lack of friction is the true definition of policy uncertainty.
Wow. Okay, so that's country A. Now contrast that with the alternative.
Now imagine country B. Country B has a system with multiple independent branches of government.
Like the US or the UK?
Right. You have an executive branch, you have a lower house of parliament, you have an upper house of parliament, you have a robust, fiercely independent judiciary.
Lots of moving parts.
And crucially, let's imagine those different branches are controlled by entirely different political parties with wildly conflicting ideologies. One party represents labor unions, the other represents rural farmers, the other represents urban elites.
So they all hate each other.
Pretty much. Every single one of those institutional actors is a veto point. For any major policy to change, for taxes to go up, or for property laws to be rewritten, that new law has to survive a brutal gauntlet of actors who actively hate each other and want to block each other.
So, wait. Gridlock is actually a good thing for capital?
Yeah.
You're telling me that billions of dollars of multinational investment actively, deliberately seek out political gridlock because, as a citizen, political gridlock is the most infuriating thing in the world. It means nothing gets done.
Exactly. And that is the brilliant counterintuitive insight. The exact same institutional friction that frustrates ordinary citizens, the slow, agonizing inability of a government to pass laws quickly, is the exact same friction that makes a multinational corporation feel safe enough to pour thousands of tons of concrete and build a 30-year factory.
That makes so much sense when you frame it that way.
From the perspective of long-term capital investment, gridlock is the absolute holy grail. The worst nightmare for an investor isn't a strict, heavy-handed rule. It's a rule that can change overnight.
Wow.
The Political Hazards Index proves this statistically. As the number of effective veto points in a country increases, the political hazard score drops significantly, and the mathematical probability of a Japanese firm building a plant in that country rises exponentially. Capital absolutely flees unconstrained power.
That is it's a completely different lens to view the world through. It explains why seemingly chaotic, bickering democracies can attract so much wealth, while stable dictatorships struggle to get foreign companies to actually build physical infrastructure there.
Exactly right.
But I have to ask about the methodology here. This sounds like an incredibly elegant theory, but how exactly do we know this isn't just a neat narrative applied after the fact?
Ah, the math.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that they ran this through a digital sieve. How did they process 2 million decisions to mathematically isolate that specific political signal, the veto points, from all the other noise in the world?
This is where we really have to appreciate the mathematical engine driving the entire study. They used a statistical tool called a discrete time logic model.
Okay, a mouthful.
Now, I promise I won't drag us into the deepest, darkest weeds of academic statistics, but we need to understand conceptually how this works. Think of the logic model as a massive multidimensional filter.
A filter, got it.
When you are looking at 165 companies, deciding whether to enter 155 countries over 7 years, there is an unimaginable amount of noise. You have currency exchange rates fluctuating wildly. You have regional biases. Maybe companies just prefer countries closer to Japan.
Sure.
You have massive differences in the size of the firms. Toyota operates differently than a small zipper manufacturer. All of that noise obscures the truth.
Right. So a cynic could look at the data and say, oh, Japanese companies didn't care about veto points. They just went to countries in Southeast Asia because the flight was shorter, and those countries just happen to have certain governments.
Exactly what a cynic would say.
How do the researchers prove the cynic wrong?
That is exactly what the discrete time logic model solves for. It allows the researchers to mathematically control for all of those alternative explanations simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
They inputted the geographic region, they inputted the specific year, they inputted the examined industry code, they measured the size of the firm, their export intensity, their annual R&D budget.
Threw everything in there.
The model essentially freezes all those other variables in place. It says, okay, assuming two companies are exactly the same size, in the exact same industry, looking at the exact same geographic region in the exact same year. What is the specific isolated impact of the veto points?
That's brilliant.
And what is the isolated impact of the competitor imitation?
Okay, I asked earlier about jargon. In the literature, they talk about a highly negative log likelihood. I read that and my eyes just completely glazed over. What does that actually mean in plain English regarding this filter?
Log likelihood is basically a grading system for the mathematical model. It measures how well the model explains the actual real-world data compared to just random guessing.
Okay.
A highly negative log likelihood in this specific statistical context is the model screaming, "I have found the signal."
Ah, okay.
It proves that the patterns we are discussing, the intense flight to veto points, and the obsessive copying of rivals are not random chance. They are incredibly strong, statistically significant laws of corporate behavior.
It's like they built a scientific control group, but applied it to the raw, messy chaos of global capitalism.
That's a great way to put it.
And when they ran that massive mathematical filter, it actually revealed another really fascinating, almost contradictory behavior about what these companies were hunting for. The math proved that Japanese firms were simultaneously hunting for two completely different macroeconomic environments. They wanted massive consumer markets, meaning places with huge booming populations.
Right.
But they also wanted rock-bottom survival costs, meaning places with very low per capita GDP.
Yes, the model highlights the dual motivation of the 1990s expansion. They weren't just looking for cheap labor to build products and export them back to a wealthy Japan.
No.
And they weren't just looking for rich consumers in America or Europe to sell high-end goods to. They were doing both simultaneously across different supply chain networks.
Playing both sides of the coin.
They were drawn to massive populations because that represents future market potential. But they were deeply attracted to low per capita GDP because in the brutal global reshuffling of the 90s, ultra-cheap labor was the ultimate safety net for manufacturing margins.
But speaking of the math revealing surprises, the model also completely shattered my assumptions about who actually drives globalization.
Oh, the R&D stuff.
Yes. Because when I think of a company going overseas, I assume it's the absolute titans of innovation. I picture the companies with the biggest, most secretive research and development labs, the ones holding all the bleeding-edge tech patents.
The Apples and the Sonys.
Right. You go overseas because your product is so undeniably superior that the world demands it. But the model showed that having an elite R&D intensity didn't actually make a firm statistically more likely to go overseas.
Which is another incredible paradox that upends traditional theory. The classic theory of the multinational corporation, one taught for decades, assumes you expand overseas specifically to exploit a proprietary advantage.
Exactly.
You have a special patented technology or a unique brand name. If you have that elite advantage, you cross the ocean to monetize it. If you don't have it, you stay home and serve your local market.
That makes total logical sense.
But the Japanese industrial network of the 90s operated on a completely different logic.
Right. The giant tech leaders, the big automakers like Toyota or Honda, they definitely went overseas. The model confirms that. But they didn't go alone.
No, they didn't.
And this is the crazy part. A massive wave of tiny, no-tech, relatively unknown part suppliers were just sucked into the global slipstream right behind them.
Swept right up.
These little companies didn't have elite R&D budgets. They didn't have global brand recognition. They just had a quiet contract to supply windshield wipers or specific plastic moldings or brake pads to Toyota.
Right.
And when Toyota moved a major assembly plant to Thailand or the US to avoid tariffs, these tiny suppliers had a gun to their heads. They had to pack up and move too or lose their only major client.
Survival of the fittest, basically.
The math captures that perfectly. For a massive chunk of this capital migration, it wasn't about possessing elite technology. It was entirely about being dragged along by the gravity of the network.
But that raises a really important question about agency and panic. We've established that firms imitate their rivals and suppliers follow their buyers, all to reduce the profound anxiety of the unknown.
Yes.
But who is the most anxious? Who is the most susceptible to this herd mentality? Because not every company acts like a terrified follower.
That's true.
The data reveals exactly who is the most desperate to look out the window and follow the crowd.
Oh, this is my favorite part of the entire study. Because it turns out we can literally mathematically measure the exact magnitude of corporate panic.
It's amazing.
There is a chart in the study table 5 that drops an absolute bombshell of a statistic. It looks at the difference between a company that has local experience in a foreign country versus a company that is a complete novice.
Okay.
So when a Japanese firm has zero local experience in a foreign country, meaning they have never built a plant there before, they don't know the language, they don't know the labor laws, they don't know the culture, seeing their peers enter that country boosts their own likelihood to enter by a staggering 433% compared to an experienced firm.
433%.
Yeah.
It is a massive, almost violent behavioral spike.
It's a panic attack.
The researchers referred to this dynamic as highlighting the difference between the blessing of experience and the curse of being a novice.
The curse of being a novice.
When you are a complete novice facing that firm-specific uncertainty we talked about, the actions of others aren't just a gentle hint. They are a blazing lighthouse in a pitch-black storm.
Wow.
You cling to that signal because it is literally the only signal you have. You have no internal data, so you rely entirely on external social data.
It's exactly like a middle school dance. Think about it.
Oh, this is good.
When you first arrive at the gym as a 7th grader, the lights are low, the music is too loud, you have absolutely no idea what the social rules are. You are a complete novice.
Terrified.
So what do? You cling to your friends. If your group of friends moves to the bleachers, you move to the bleachers. If they wander over to the punch bowl, you go to the punch bowl.
Fully.
You are acting entirely 100% on the social cues of your peers because you are terrified of making a mistake on your own. A 433% surge in imitation is just a rigorous mathematical measurement of middle school dance panic applied to billionaires in bespoke suits.
That analogy actually holds up remarkably well under the data. Because the fascinating part is what happens next. Think about the dance. What happens an hour later?
Right. Once you know your way around the gym, you don't care what your friends are doing anymore. You have your own intel. You know where the good snacks are. You know which teachers are watching which doors.
Exactly. And the data shows the exact same trajectory for corporations. The second that a firm finally takes the plunge, builds its first factory in that new country, and survives long enough to gain its own local experience, the massive imitation effect practically vanishes.
That is wild. It just evaporates.
It drops off a cliff. Once a firm gets local experience, they become almost entirely immune to peer pressure. They stop looking out the boardroom window to see what the competition's doing, and they start looking down at their own internal data, their own sales figures, their own labor relations reports.
They grew up.
Exactly. Experience is the absolute antidote to cognitive panic. It cures the ignorance about the local market.
Let me throw in one more wrinkle here that I found buried in the research, which connects to this idea of being a novice.
Right.
What if you are a complete novice in, say, Argentina, but you have built 20 factories across Southeast Asia? Does that help you? Because the research points out this idea of analogical heuristic search, which I'll just translate as using past experiences from completely different places to guess how to survive here.
Yes, the impact of third country experience. This is a brilliant nuance in the data.
Okay, tell me more.
If a firm has zero local experience in the target country, they don't just completely freeze, they search their institutional memory. If they successfully navigated the bureaucracy in Indonesia 5 years ago, they attempt to apply those same lessons to the bureaucracy in Brazil today.
That makes sense.
The data shows that having significant third country experience boosts a novice firm's probability of entering a new market by over 150%. It provides a massive burst of confidence.
Wow. So past trauma or past victory in another country makes you 150% more likely to take the leap in a new country.
Correct. But here is the catch. Once the firm actually gains local experience in that new country, the value of that third country experience plummets to almost zero. It only provides a 1% boost.
Really?
Because why rely on an analogy of Indonesia when you now have hard, ground-level truth about Brazil?
Experience replaces the analogy. That makes perfect sense. Okay, so experience is the ultimate cure. It cures the middle school dance panic. It overrides the need to copy your rivals. It replaces analogies with hard facts.
Right.
You would naturally think, therefore, that experience cures everything, right? If you stay in a country long enough, if you build relationships for 10 or 20 years, you learn all the ropes.
I think so.
You make friends in high places. You figure out how to navigate the system no matter how corrupt or difficult it is. Experience is an impenetrable shield.
Yeah.
But the data says absolutely not.
This brings us to what might be the darkest, most unyielding finding of the entire paper. The lethal wall.
The lethal wall.
The researchers explicitly tested whether a firm's hard-won local experience could mitigate the terror of political hazards, those veto points we discussed earlier. They ran the statistical interactions to see if highly experienced firms that have been in a country for decades, were less deterred by a dictatorial, low veto point government than absolute novices.
Because you assume the veteran company has the dictator's phone number on speed dial. They play golf with the ministers. They know how to smooth things over. So what did the stats show?
The result, zero.
Yeah.
Complete statistical insignificance. The interaction between local experience and political hazard mitigation was a flat line.
I want to make sure I fully grasp this because the implications are huge. So, what does this actually mean in the real world?
It means that while experience is a perfect cure for market ignorance, it teaches you what consumers want and how to hire local workers, it is absolutely unequivocally not a shield against political chaos. It emphasizes the grim structural reality of unconstrained political power. You can learn the local culture all you want, but a volatile, unpredictable political regime, an autocrat, without veto points to constrain him, is a structural brick wall.
It means you cannot friend your way out of a dictatorship.
Precisely.
It doesn't matter if you've been operating in that country for a decade. It doesn't matter how many jobs you've created or how many local charities you've funded.
Nope.
If the fundamental system is broken, if there are no veto points to constrain the executive's power, the autocrat will not spare your factory just because you are an old friend when the political winds shift.
Because the risk is systemic, not relational.
Yeah.
A government that possesses the structural capacity to change its mind unilaterally on a Tuesday will inevitably do so, regardless of your firm's specific tenure or charm offensive.
That's brutal.
Policy uncertainty cannot be charmed. If the political structure is hazardous, the only rational choice for capital is to never enter in the first place, or, if you are already there and the veto points start collapsing, to pack up your machinery and leave. All the experience in the world cannot overwrite the physics of unconstrained political power.
That is such a chilling, realistic view of global business. It completely strips away all the glossy PR you read in annual corporate reports about building long-term synergistic partnerships with host nations.
It really does.
If the veto points aren't there, the money won't stay. Period. Now, with any massive groundbreaking study like this that claims to have uncovered the hidden psychological and political rules of global capitalism, you are naturally going to get cynics.
Oh, always.
You are going to get traditional economists who look at this whole herd behavior narrative, this idea of terrified companies seeking cognitive safety, and they are going to say, hold on a minute, I don't buy it.
And the researchers fully anticipated that pushback. There is a very valid, well-established counterargument in industrial economics regarding why firms in the exact same industry tend to follow each other into new markets.
Okay.
The cynical view is that this has absolutely nothing to do with social learning or cognitive survival.
Right. The cynics would say, these CEOs aren't scared seventh graders looking for a lighthouse in a storm. They are ruthless, calculating snipers. They are giant oligopolies playing a vicious game of global chess.
Exactly.
If Toyota builds a factory in Mexico, Honda has to build a factory in Mexico, not because Honda is scared of the unknown, but simply to deny Toyota a geographic monopoly. Even if Honda hates the idea of being in Mexico, they have to go just to neutralize Toyota's potential cost advantage. It's not a search for safety, it's defensive warfare.
That is a classic theory known as oligopolistic reaction. It's the idea of mutual forbearance and strategic blocking. And it makes intuitive sense.
Sure it does.
But the data in this study violently disagrees with that being the primary driver of this massive capital migration. And the way Henisz and Delios proved the cynics wrong is a masterclass in statistical robustness.
What did they do?
They ran sensitivity tests to explicitly smash this conspiracy theory. They took their entire data set and separated the industries into two distinct groups using something called the CR4 index.
Okay, stop there. What is the CR4 index? Let's translate that for me.
The CR4 index, the four-firm concentration ratio, is a standard metric used by governments to measure how monopolistic an industry is. It simply asks, what percentage of the total market share is controlled by the top four biggest companies in this industry?
Ah, okay. So a high CR4 means it's an oligopoly, like the airline industry or big tech where 3 or 4 giants control 80% of everything.
Exactly. And a low CR4 means it's a highly dispersed, fragmented industry. Think of restaurants, or specialized chemical manufacturing, or small textile producers, where thousands of tiny companies are all competing and no one has more than 1% of the market.
Okay, so they split the 165 Japanese companies into these two buckets, the oligopolies and the fragmented industries. What were they looking for?
If the cynics were right, if the imitation behavior was purely about strategic oligopolistic warfare and blocking your enemy, you would expect the imitation effect to multiply exponentially in those highly concentrated, high CR4 industries.
Because there's only a few of them.
Right. If there are only 3 competitors in the world, you watch them like a hawk and block their every move. But in a fragmented industry with thousands of players, you can't possibly block all of them. So under the cynics theory, The imitation effect should completely disappear in fragmented industries.
But I'm guessing it didn't disappear.
The imitation effect remained incredibly steady and highly statistically significant across both groups. It simply didn't matter if it was a near monopoly dominated by 3 giants or a highly fragmented industry with 100 players. The fundamental, urgent urge to copy the rival was the exact same.
Which completely destroys the myth of the cold, calculating corporate chess master. We elevate these CEOs and these boards in the media. We treat them as these omniscient strategists playing 4D chess, plotting moves 10 steps ahead.
But they're not.
No. The CR4 data proves they aren't executing some grand sniper strategy. They are literally just a herd of zebras crossing a crocodile-infested river. They cross together right next to each other, not to block each other from getting to the other side, but simply because it is utterly terrifying to cross the river alone.
That is a brilliant synthesis of the entire paper's conclusion. The herd provides safety. It provides safety not just from the crocodiles, the real-world market failures, but from the paralyzing anxiety of the crossing itself.
Yeah.
The need to reduce nation uncertainty by observing the actions of peers is a universal, deeply human corporate instinct, regardless of how concentrated the market is.
That brings us to the ultimate synthesis of everything we've talked about today, the grand unified theory of what Henisz and Delios discovered in those 2 million data points. They revealed what we might call the triple cage of capital.
It's a powerful framework. We have this poetic, almost romantic idea in modern economics that in a globalized world, money flows like water. We think capital is totally frictionless, freely finding the path of least resistance around the globe.
Right.
But this empirical masterpiece proves that capital is not free. It is deeply constrained. It is actually trapped in a 3-dimensional cage.
Let's lay out the 3 bars of the cage. What's the first one?
First, there is the regulative cage.
Yeah.
This is the hard, unyielding, structural reality of a host country's political hazards. The veto points.
Okay.
Capital cannot flow where power is unconstrained. If a government lacks the institutional friction to protect property rights, if the executive can change the rules on a Tuesday, the regulative cage snaps shut and global capital simply bounces off.
No veto points, no money. It doesn't matter how cheap the labor is or how big the population is. That's the regulative page. What's the second?
The second is the cognitive cage. This is the herd mentality, the frequency-based and trait-based imitation. Capital doesn't just flow blindly into the void of the unknown. It's too terrified.
The middle school dance.
Exactly. Instead, it follows the deep grooves cut by those who went before, especially direct rivals. It is trapped by its own desperate need for psychological safety and social legitimacy. It relies on the social cues of the herd to navigate the dark.
And the third bar of the cage.
The normative cage. This represents the internal rules of thumb, the reliance on a firm's own past experience. As we saw with the lethal wall and the novice premium, once a company learns a certain way of operating or gains experience in a specific type of market, they become bound by those internal norms.
They get stuck in their ways.
Right. They stop looking at the herd, yes, but they start relying entirely on their own historically accumulated biases and past experiences, sometimes ignoring new, objective data.
The regulative, the cognitive, and the normative. The veto points, the herd, and the past experience. It completely changes how you look at the map of the global economy.
It really does.
And bringing this directly to you, the listener, look at the world today, right now, in the 2020s. We're living through an era that feels unprecedented. Supply chains are violently restructuring.
Absolutely.
Tariffs are flying back and forth between superpowers. Talk of decoupling and nearshoring and friendshoring is everywhere. It feels chaotic, like the fundamental rules of global trade are being ripped up and burned.
It feels chaotic to us, but the underlying rules haven't changed at all. The Mobius strip of history is just looping back on itself.
How so?
The exact same survival code written in this 2001 paper, analyzing the crisis of the 1990s, is the exact same code driving the trillions of dollars moving around the globe right now.
That's wild.
Capital is still terrified of the unknown. It is still fleeing unconstrained power. It is still desperately searching for the safety of political veto points. And when the fog of modern trade wars gets too thick to see through, modern CEOs still frantically look out the window to copy the rival next door.
It really makes you rethink the very word strategy. We put so much faith in the idea of perfectly rational, independent decision-making, both in business and in our own lives. But maybe that perfect rationality is the biggest illusion of all.
It is an illusion we construct, a narrative we tell ourselves, to make ourselves feel in control of an inherently uncontrollable future. But the data 2 million unblinking data points points to a much more social, instinctual, and ultimately human reality.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly uncomfortable thought for you to mull over after this deep dive ends. Think about your own life. Strip away the corporate billions and just look at yourself.
Yeah.
Think about your major career shifts. Think about the big investments you've made or the times you've decided to move to a new city across the country. When you face the absolute uncalculable unknown, how much of what you confidently call your strategic rational planning is actually just you looking around the room, finding someone who looks like they know what they're doing, and quietly getting in line right behind them?